Hey man,
Watch out! It's a woodpecker from space!
We are going to start a new sculpture today, and it's going to be a standing pose. So one of the things when you work with wet terracotta clay is that it kind of falls down, and we are not going to be using an armature for this sculpture. And you can watch one of my older videos. It's a sculpture of Viriatu, and I did that without an armature. Now there is a support that I'm going to use, and I'm going to show you what it is. And for a standing pose, that means that there's going to be a lot of frustration in dealing with the sculpture potentially collapsing, but I want to show you that it is possible to do figure sculptures that are standing without an armature with wet terracotta clay. So let's get started. This is the base that we use for the last sculpture. It's a very large board, and I didn't really need a board this big. So this time I'm going to get rid of it. You have to realize that in a standing pose, things could potentially break. I've had sculptures that I've worked for a very long time just completely collapse. And that is one of the reasons you want a sculpture stand that's a little bit bigger, because sometimes they do fall over, and it's nice that it stays on the stand instead of the floor. But that is a little bit, we don't want it to get to that point. This is our base. And this is a very strange contraption, but I want to show you what it is. It's simply a board, and I've wrapped a plastic bag on it so it doesn't start eating away at the clay. And over here I have this contraption, and basically this kind of slides out. These things you can find at Home Depot, and you can use a nut if you don't have this bar, but this is just a way of tightening this, and it squeezes the plywood. That way it's going to stay there. This, you can't get it anywhere, but this is just a way of putting this here, and then this is going to go into the lower back of the sculpture, or wherever you want it on the sculpture, and it's going to hold the sculpture up. So our sculpture could be, fairly big, and it'll just be held using these two prongs. It's not a perfect system, but it does hold it fairly well. We just want the figure to be held in place and not collapse. You could build it without this. You don't need this. Just so you guys know, you do not need this contraption. This is just something that I devised in order to hold the sculpture up just a little bit. Simply, it moves around this, and I can slide it down or I can slide it up to figure out where I want it on the sculpture. And then you use this to kind of tighten it, and it stays there. It's a little bit loose, and I've used this so much that it's lost a little bit of its positioning. So this prong, it's like a 3-prong system, and you put it here. I actually had it upside down for some reason. The clay, if I shape it here, and I can make the figure fairly big, you'll see that it's going to support it. We're going to be building a platform just so the figure will stand, but the figure is going to be so much more vertically tall that all of this is, we don't need a very large base. Also keep in mind that I probably am going to put like a couple stumps of clay holding the figure on both sides. Here we go, and this is my reference. I got this from Postspace. It's been really good. I am kind of limited by the poses, of course, but I did find a pretty decent one. This is the one I picked. There's many variations of it, and when you look at this, you notice that she's got kind of like her weight, I think, evenly distributed on 2 feet, but as we go around, I was contemplating changing the arms and doing something with it, and she has a really nice figure. So I don't know. There is another one where she just has her arms going down, and it might be nice, but I thought this was a little bit more contemporary. The detail of the neck, you can see the ears in very good resolution. And I really appreciate that about Postspace, the newer ones. The older ones do not have that. So here's a detail of the back, detail of the bottom, detail of the legs, and then multiple versions. So you can even have a nice view of the head at this. Very good. Fresh bag of clay. This should be kind of perfect. This is going to get us going. Let's get our clay and drop it. Now you have to drop it in a good position. Our eyes to be just drawn fully on the figure. So we're going to be building this thing up. Are these wooden tools to draw and to make marks. It really doesn't matter which way it is, but what we have to figure out is on the model where the feet are and in the relation, like where her hips are facing. So I usually like to mark on my base, usually just by using my eyes, but I'll do this as reference for all you guys watching. So this would be the front, and this would be the rear. And in a way, we want to build a cone going up. This is Rodin's method as well. If you look at the Balzac by Rodin, he built a cone going up because he didn't use an armature inside, and that is one way to go about making something very stable. A cone is basically a pyramid, and that essentially could be your armature. So if you build a cone going up, and then we'll attach it to here, to our sculpture, but you don't even need this. You don't need this. You can just build like a big cone going up. So we are going to be shaping this. We want to make sure that this adheres properly to the base, and you really need to be doing that now. Otherwise, if you build a sculpture without the adhering this to the base, the legs are going to be breaking from the base. So just by adding this and squeezing it, you can build it up. It's not the most intuitive, because if you had a armature inside, you wouldn't have to worry about the engineering that goes behind this sort of system around. And you see this just kind of moves around. This is not really meant to be done this way, but this is just an easy way. Once I get this initial phase done, it's a lot easier. So I'm going to spend some time to build the cone up, and then we're going to start sculpting very rudimentary forms of the figure. So it's not going to be perfect, especially in the beginning. One of the things now that we have to do is indicate the legs, because we want to figure out where the middle is going to be. So we're sizing it at this point. This is just like a big stump. If you look at the model head on, the middle is going to be the pubis synthesis, which is right, well, I haven't kind of figured it out, but if I draw this line, that's going to be my leg, my left leg. That means that our hips are going to be wider here. That means that we need to make this taller because we want to have the hips right about here, I think. And also keep in mind when you're sculpting, there's going to be a flow to it. So this one is almost like a reverse C shape. Then I'll take my tool and I'll start sculpting. Because of the without the armature, you have to also have a little bit of a delicate touch to get it to stay on there. So I'm pushing in quite a bit in the prongs because I want to make sure that it stays together and it doesn't become like two pieces. I have seen this kind of fall apart. So we have a leg here, another leg here, and we're starting to see the torso. So this is the middle. So if I measure it to the base, it's going to become touching even more clay, and I'm going to add more clay onto this. What you see around me is old clay that I removed from the previous project of the Saturn, and that's what I'm using. It's a little bit hard, so I'm wetting it, and your clay should never be sticking to your fingers like this. It should never feel like the consistency of mud. And for this session, I really just want to concentrate on the bottom because it's so important for the structure. I'm not going to add too much up here. The only thing I really want is to make this firm enough that it's not going to be breaking overnight. And I do have already some structure on it, but so as I am adding the head here, I just want to establish the gesture. She is looking quite a bit like this, and this line represents the front, but I'm not sure I'm going to be sculpting the head just yet. Another very important thing is the direction of the shoulder. So if you draw a line that way, it's going to be very angled because she is twisting her torso. And also keep in mind that there is this line going down the figure, and if you keep that in mind, it'll help you establish the proportions and the gesture. Right now it's really just about the gesture. It doesn't really matter about even the size of it, but we want to be able to try and get some of this roughed in. So right now I'm adding the arm, and I really just want to establish the size of the sculpture. Looking straight this way, her torso, and this is the good thing about the clay being wet, is that she is twisting her stomach. It's actually like facing this way. So her belly button, for example, is right over here because she is facing this part this way, and then her torso is kind of going back. And this is really her hand, and her arm is going to be right about there, but we want to be able to establish the position of the arm. And what I like to do is just kind of lump in a little bit of the clay just to kind of suggest where it is. Do your gesture, and I like to keep it really flat, and using one of these tools is really important. It's just like a paint scraper, and it keeps your sculpture nice and geometric in the beginning. Guys, here we are, and I pretty much have a gesture which is not exactly the best, but the one thing I wanted to capture is that reverse C curve, and I'll probably exaggerate it a little bit more. And since this is still wet, I can move it around, and this is very soft. And remember, this is a standing sculpture without an armature, so a lot of what could happen is that it could collapse. It's always going to be moving down, so you constantly have to kind of push it up and try and lift it. And I suggest people put more clay over here and support that leg. That's what I'm going to be doing now, putting the rest of the clay here. It doesn't really matter. It could be like just a chunk. It's a cone. Also, the neck is getting a little bit wide, but at this point, we really just want to figure out the way we want this to be.